knock never came. The door burst open instead. Ilara had been asleep for less than 2 hours, when the sound of heavy boots on her wooden floor jolted her upright. She grabbed the small iron poker beside her bed before her eyes had even adjusted to the dark, her heart hammering so loud she could feel it in her throat. 3 men filled the doorway, their broad shoulders blocking the pale moonlight, their armor streaked with mud and something darker that she did not want to name. "Healer," the tallest one said. His voice was low and controlled, but his hands were shaking. "We need you now." Ilara was already moving. She had been the village healer since she was 19 years old, when her mother passed the role to her along with 2 leather satchels, a dozen clay jars of dried herbs, and the quiet expectation that she would never flinch. That had been 6 years ago. In those 6 years she had pulled arrow tips from shoulders, set broken legs in the middle of the night, brought down fevers that should have killed grown men, and held the hands of those she could not save, while she hummed to help them pass. She had learned not to flinch. She had also learned not to ask questions until after. She asked one now. "How bad?" "Bad enough that we rode 4 hours in the dark instead of waiting for morning." That told her everything. She snatched her satchels from their hooks, pulled a heavy wool cloak over her nightdress, pushed her feet into her boots, and followed them out. They had left their horses at the edge of her yard. A 4th man was still mounted, holding the reins of a 5th horse, and across that horse, draped sideways and secured with a rough cord so he would not fall, was a man so large that Ilara's first thought was that the horse must be exhausted. Her second thought was that he was losing too much blood. Even in the moonlight, she could see the dark wetness spreading across his side, soaking through what had once been a very fine shirt. His face was turned away from her. His left hand hung loose. She could not see him breathe. "Get him inside," she said. "Carefully. If you drop him, I will make your lives difficult." 2 of the men lifted him between them with surprising gentleness, as if they had been waiting for permission to be careful. Ilara held the door open and pointed to the wide wooden table in the center of her workroom, the one she had specifically built long enough to lay a full-grown person flat. She lit 3 lamps in quick succession, turned them up as high as they would go, and came to stand at his side. She cut away the shirt without ceremony. He had 2 deep wounds along his left side, the kind made by a blade rather than an arrow, and they were long and ugly, and had not been properly cleaned. Someone had packed them with cloth to slow the bleeding, which had bought him time, but also trapped dirt and debris inside. There was bruising across his ribs on the right side, deep purple and already spreading, which meant either a hard blow, or a cracked bone, or both. There was a gash along his collarbone that was superficial, but had bled dramatically, which was probably why his shirt was soaked through. And there was a swollen lump on the back of his head that she found when she ran her fingers through his hair checking for other injuries. She straightened up and looked at the 4 men standing along the walls of her workroom, watching her with expressions that ranged from desperate to controlled. "He hit his head," she said. "How long has he been unconscious?" "About 3 hours, the tall one said. "Has he woken at all, even briefly?" "Once, he said something, then went under again." "What did he say?" The men exchanged a glance. "He said to keep moving." Ilara nodded. That was useful information, not about the words, but about the fact that he had been coherent enough to give an order. She boiled water over the small fire she kept banked through the night, dissolved the right powders in it, and cleaned the wounds with methodical care. She removed the old packing material piece by piece. She flushed the cuts with water until the water ran clear. She packed them again with fresh herb-soaked cloth that would draw out any remaining impurities. The blade wounds would need closing, and she did that with small, even stitches, the kind her mother had made her practice on leather until her fingers knew the motion without thinking. While she worked, she hummed. She did not do it intentionally. It was simply what happened when her hands were occupied, and her mind was running through a checklist of what needed doing next. The song was something her mother had taught her, a slow, repetitive melody in an old dialect that Ilara only half understood. Her mother had called it the crossing song. It was for people who were standing at the edge of something and needed help deciding whether to stay or go. Ilara had always thought of it as a song for the dying, something to ease the fear out of a room and make the silence feel less heavy. She was halfway through the second round of stitching when she noticed the man's breathing had changed. It was not worse, it was more deliberate. She kept her eyes on her work, but something in the back of her mind filed that observation away. She finished the stitches, bound the wounds with clean linen strips, and splinted his right side gently, to support the bruised ribs. She checked his pulse twice. It was stronger than it had been when he arrived. She cleaned the gash at his collarbone, and pressed a salve into it, then covered it. She felt the lump on his head again, and found it had not grown, which was the best she could hope for at this stage. Then she washed her hands in the basin, dried them on a clean cloth, and turned to face the men. "He will live," she said, "barring fever or infection, which I will watch for. He should not be moved tonight, or tomorrow, or for several days at minimum. The ribs need time. The head wound needs watching. If he wakes and cannot tell you his own name, or if he becomes confused or cannot see clearly, you come and get me immediately no matter what hour it is." "We understand," the tall one said. "There is a cot in the back room. You may sleep in shifts. I have a chair, and I will check on him through the night." She paused. "Is there anything I need to know about him? Any conditions? Any medicines he takes? Anything that might affect how he heals?" Another glance between the men. The tall one stepped forward slightly. "He heals fast," he said. "Faster than most." "Most people do not," Ilara said, "when they have been opened up this badly. Fast is a relative word. I will judge his progress by what I see." "Of course," the man said, and something shifted in his posture, a slight easing of tension that told her they were relieved she was not asking more. She did not ask more. Not yet. She settled into her chair beside the table and checked her patient's pulse one more time. His face, now that she could see it clearly in the lamplight, was not what she had expected. She was not sure what she had expected. Something rougher, maybe. The men who came to her door in the middle of the night were usually rough-edged, marked by hard living, in ways that showed in their faces. This man had a face that was simply tired. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that came from squinting into sun and wind, not from age. His jaw was set even in unconsciousness, the kind of set that meant a person had trained themselves to look untroubled, even when they were not. His hair was dark and longer than fashionable at court, she imagined, though she had never been to court. His hands, she had noticed while examining him, were not soft. He worked with them. Whatever else he was, he worked with his hands. She did not know who he was. She was fairly certain the 4 men watching from her back room did not want her to know. She filed that away too, and went back to watching his breathing, and did not ask. The night moved slowly. She checked him every half hour, felt for fever at his neck and forehead, listened to the steadiness of his lungs. The lamps burned down, and she trimmed them without waking, moving quietly from habit. Outside, the village was completely still, the kind of still that only happened in the deep middle of the night, when even the dogs had given up and gone to sleep. It was during her 4th check, perhaps 2 hours before dawn, that she noticed his eyes were open. Not barely open. Not the unfocused glaze of someone drifting in and out. He was awake and watching her with the careful, contained attention of a man who had trained himself to observe before he revealed himself. She met his gaze without startling. "You are in my workroom," she said, her voice low and even. "You were brought here by 4 men, who seem very attached to whether you survive. I have cleaned and closed your wounds, supported your ribs, and watched your head injury through the night. You are not in danger at the moment, but you should not try to sit up." She did not rush him. She picked up the small cup of water she had prepared and held it where he could see it. "Can you tell me your name?" A pause. Not the pause of a man who did not know, the pause of a man deciding what to say. "Kale," he said. His voice was rough from disuse and pain, but steady. "Good," she said. "That means your head is working. Can you tell me where you are?" "A healer's workroom." His eyes moved briefly around the space, taking inventory. "Somewhere in the lowland villages, based on the herbs, we rode south." "We did," she agreed, though she had not been present for the riding. "You are in Aldenmere. It is a small village, and I am its only healer. My name is Ilara." He looked back at her. Something in his expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, not softening exactly, but becoming more present, as if her name had landed somewhere instead of simply passing through. "Ilara," he repeated. "Yes. Do you remember what happened to you?" "I remember enough." "That is not an answer to my question, but it will do for now." She offered him the cup, small sips, Your stomach will not be happy with much." He took the cup from her hand, their fingers not quite touching, and drank. His eyes closed briefly when the water went down, and she saw the effort it cost him not to show how much he needed it. When he handed the cup back, she took it and set it aside. "You should sleep again if you can," she said. "Your body needs it more than your questions need answering." "I did not ask any questions." "No," she said, "but you were about to." The smallest thing happened at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. More like the place where a smile might grow if given enough time and enough reason. "Sleep," she said again, and went back to her chair. He closed his eyes. She did not know then that he did not sleep. She did not know that he lay still and listened to the sound of her moving quietly around the room, straightening things, checking her supply jars, writing small notes in the logbook she kept for every patient. She did not know that he had woken well before she noticed, and had lain still watching her work, and had heard the full length of the crossing song, and had felt something in his chest loosen in a way that alarmed him considerably more than the blade wounds had. She did not know any of that. She went about her work, and she hummed, and the night passed around them both. By the time the first pale gray light of morning came through her window, his color was better, his breathing was even, and the fever had not come. She allowed herself, for the first time in hours, to believe that he was going to be fine. She was right about that. She was wrong about how long he intended to stay. The sun was barely above the hills when Ilara heard the first argument. She had stepped outside to fill her water bucket from the well, which sat in the yard about 20 paces from her front door, and the voices carried clearly through the thin morning air. She recognized the tone immediately. It was the specific kind of tension that lived between a man who wanted to give an order and a man who had decided not to follow it. She took her time with the bucket. "You are well enough to be moved," the tall one said. His name, she had learned, was Owen. He had introduced himself formally to her that morning, when she came back inside, which had told her something about him. He was the kind of man who offered his name to healers, as a way of signaling respect. "The horses are rested. We can have a litter rigged in an hour. 2 hours careful travel and you will be at Westgate. From there by coach to the capital." "No." The voice was flat, uncomplicated by apology. "My lord." I said no. A silence. Ilara very deliberately did not look toward the room where this conversation was happening. She set her bucket down on the workroom table and began preparing the morning's first task, which was to change the wound bindings and check for any early sign of trouble. She had laid out everything she needed and was washing her hands when the door between the rooms opened and Owen stepped through, his face carefully arranged into the expression of a man who was managing his thoughts with some effort. "He will not be moved," Owen said. "I know," Ilara said. "I told you that last night. He agrees with you. I imagine he has his own reasons." Owen studied her for a moment. He was trying to decide, she thought, how much to explain and how much to withhold. She saved him the trouble. "I do not need to know who he is to treat him," she said. "Whatever the two of you are working out in there, work it out. My job is to make sure those wounds do not turn, and that his head heals cleanly. Everything else is your concern." Owen let out a breath that was not quite a sigh. "You are very calm, for a woman who had 4 armed strangers break into her cottage in the middle of the night." "You knocked." "Barely. It was enough," she said. "Let me in to see him now." Cale was half sitting up when she came through, propped on his right elbow, which she could see immediately was costing him. His face showed nothing, but the line of his shoulder told her plenty. She crossed the room, took the extra pillow from the cot where Owen had slept, and placed it behind Cale, without asking permission. "You can stop pretending your side does not hurt," she said. "There is no one here to impress." He settled back against the pillow, and she saw the small, involuntary release of tension in his jaw that happened when the pressure on his ribs eased. "Owen tells me you want to keep me here," he said. "I do not want anything in particular," she said, untying the binding at his side with practiced efficiency. "Your body dictates the terms, not me. The stitching needs at least 4 days before it will hold under any real movement. The ribs need more than that. Your head injury needs watching for at minimum another 48 hours. Those are not my preferences. They are simply facts." "I have duties," he said. "I am sure you do." She peeled back the dressing and examined the wounds. clean, which was a relief. No redness, no heat, no smell that would indicate trouble beginning. You also have stitches. The duties will still exist in 4 days. These stitches will not, if you tear them. He was quiet while she worked. She noticed he was doing it again. That careful, contained watching. He tracked her hands while she worked, but not in the way of a nervous patient checking that she was doing things correctly. He watched the way a person watches something they find genuinely interesting, with a quality of attention that was different from mere observation. It made her slightly self-conscious, which was not a feeling she often had in her workroom. "You hummed last night," he said. She did not look up. "I often do. It is a habit. If it disturbed you." "It did not disturb me." She tied off the new bandage and moved to the collarbone next. "My mother taught me the song. She was a healer before me. She said it helped." "The dying," he said quietly. She paused for only a fraction of a second, then continued. "You were awake for longer than you let on." "Yes. And you heard what I said to your men." "Most of it." She sat back and looked at him directly for the first time since she had entered the room. "The song is for people at a threshold," she said. "It is not only for the dying. My mother believed that the worst moments of illness are the ones where a person is trying to decide, without being aware of it, whether to fight or let go. She thought the song helped tip the balance toward fighting." She paused. "You did not need much tipping, as it turned out." "No," he agreed. "Your men said you heal fast." "A beat. I do. Faster than the wounds you came in with suggested you should." He held her gaze. "Yes." She nodded slowly, as if something had been confirmed rather than revealed, and went back to examining the collarbone. She did not ask the obvious question, which was why. She had an instinct for the things patients were not ready to discuss, and an equally strong instinct for when pressing them would only make them close up and become difficult. This man was not difficult. He was simply careful. She respected careful. What she did not know, and would not know for some time, was that the care he took around her was not the usual careful. He was not guarding information, or protecting a secret, in the way that a man of position typically does around strangers. He was careful in a different way entirely. He was careful the way a person is careful when something surprises them, when they had not expected to encounter a thing, and are not yet sure what to do with it. He had not expected her. He had expected a competent village healer. He had expected efficiency and practicality, and perhaps a little fear, the kind that crept into people's behavior when they sensed, without being told, that the man on their table had the power to change their lives with a word. He had encountered competence and practicality, those parts he had predicted, but the fear had not come. She had spoken to him in the dark of the night, as if he were simply a man who had been hurt and needed tending, no more, no less. She had offered him water and told him to sleep in the same steady, unadorned tone she might use with anyone. She had hummed without apology or explanation. She had told him his body dictated the terms. It had been, he was startled to realize, one of the more human experiences he could recently remember. He was still turning that over when she finished the collarbone and moved to check the lump at the back of his head, her fingers careful and cool, asking him to follow her finger with his eyes, asking him to tell her what he remembered of the previous day. He answered honestly. He could not have said exactly why. "Some gaps," she said. "But your memory is intact enough. The gaps may fill in over the next few days, or they may not. Either is normal after a head injury like yours. Does the light bother you?" "Not greatly." "Any ringing in your ears?" "No." "Good." She stepped back and assessed him with the specific, clinically detached look that she probably did not realize made her seem significantly older than she appeared. "You will eat this morning. I will bring you something simple. You will drink water every time I give it to you. You will sleep more than you think you need to. If your head begins to ache badly, you will tell me immediately. And if I need to speak with my men, they can come to you. You are not leaving this cot today." Owen, who had returned to stand in the doorway, made a small sound that might have been a cough, but had the cadence of a suppressed reaction. Cale looked at him over Alara's shoulder. Owen looked back with an expression that very carefully did not say anything at all. "Very well," Cale said. Alara nodded, apparently unsurprised by the compliance, and went to make breakfast. She brought him broth with soft bread, the kind of meal that would not ask too much of a stomach that had been through a rough night. She set it on the small table she pulled up beside the cot, and left him to eat without hovering, which he appreciated without being able to articulate why. He ate slowly, and watched the room while he did. It was a working room, not a display room. Every shelf held something useful. The herb bundles hanging from the ceiling rafters were tied in a particular way that he recognized as efficient, organized by type rather than by appearance. Her logbook sat open on the main table, and from where he sat, he could see the neat, unhurried handwriting that filled it. She had written about him last night, he assumed. He wondered what she had written. He could hear her in the front room, moving with the particular quiet efficiency of someone who had learned not to make noise in a house where sick people slept. He finished the broth. He set the cup down. He lay back and stared at the ceiling. He was going to tell Owen this morning to begin making arrangements for the return journey. That had been his plan since the moment he regained consciousness and confirmed to himself that he was not dying. He had a capital to return to. He had a war council waiting. He had things that could not be left undone, simply because a blade had found its way through his guard at an inconvenient moment. That had been the plan. He lay on the cot and did not call for Owen. He told himself it was because the healer was right about the stitches. And that was true. It was absolutely true that the stitches needed time, and that moving on them too early was the kind of mistake that turns survivable injuries into serious ones. He had known men who had made that mistake. He was not going to make it. That was the reason he was staying. He was certain of it. He was still certain of it when Alara came back to check on him an hour later, and he heard, coming through the walls of the cottage before he saw her, the soft, half-conscious thread of the crossing song she was humming as she walked. He closed his eyes. He was staying because of the stitches. He had almost convinced himself this was true when Owen came in that evening and sat down across from him with the look of a man who had been thinking something for a long time and had finally decided to say it. "The men can be posted at the perimeter," Owen said. "The village will not know what to make of us, but they will not interfere. We have supplies enough for a week if we are careful." "A week is more than necessary," Cale said. 4 days. "Of course," Owen said. Neither of them mentioned the morning's plan to leave. Owen did not ask why it had been abandoned. He had served Cale long enough to know when not to ask why. He also had eyes in his head, and ears, and he had been standing in the doorway that morning when the healer had told the Alpha King that his body dictated the terms, and Cale had said, without any of the controlled authority he usually brought to every interaction, "Very well." Owen said nothing. He went and told the men to make themselves comfortable. They had, apparently, more time here than the morning had suggested. The third day arrived the way quiet days do in small villages, without announcement or ceremony, carried in on the smell of wood smoke and bread, and the particular cold that came off the hills before the sun had fully risen. Alara was awake before the light, which was nothing unusual. She had been waking early for 6 years, trained into it by the needs of a village that did not keep polite hours when it came to being sick or injured or frightened. She started the fire in the kitchen, put water on to heat, checked her supply of clean linen strips, and then stood in the doorway between the rooms for a moment, before going in to make her morning assessment. She had a thought she was not entirely comfortable with. She was used to the feeling of responsibility for her patients. That was ordinary. She was also, in an impersonal and professional way, accustomed to caring whether they recovered. What she was not used to was the faint, slightly irritating awareness that had been growing since the first morning. The awareness that sitting across the room from Cale for an extended period of time was not unpleasant. It was a useless observation. She filed it under things she was not going to spend time on, and went in to check his wounds. He was awake. He was always awake before she came in now. Or perhaps she had not yet come in early enough to catch him sleeping. She was beginning to suspect he slept very little in general, or slept in a way that was closer to alertness than to rest, the way certain animals did in unfamiliar territory. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning," he said. She washed her hands, came to the cot, and began the examination. His color was good, better than good in fact. The bruising on his ribs had reached its ugliest stage and would begin to fade from here. The stitched wounds were clean and dry, and the skin around them was smooth and untroubled. No heat, no swelling, none of the signs she watched for most carefully. She pressed gently along the stitching, and heard no sharp intake of breath. She pressed a little more firmly. "Does this hurt?" she asked. "Some," he said. "Some as in a little, or some as in, you are being diplomatic." A brief pause. The second one. I appreciate the honesty. She straightened up and looked at him with the assessing expression she used when the facts were presenting her with something she needed to think about. You are healing faster than I expected. You said that yesterday. It was true yesterday too. She folded her hands together. I have treated many people for injuries similar to yours. The timeline I gave your men when you arrived was based on what I know about how the body recovers. You are not following that timeline. Is that a problem? It is a curiosity, she said, which is different. She looked at him steadily. I am not going to ask you to explain it. I would only point out that if the rate continues, the conversation about when you can be moved may need to happen sooner than I initially planned. Something passed through his expression that she could not read clearly. It moved too quickly. We will see, he said. She pulled the wooden chair to the side of the cot and sat down, which was something she did not typically do during morning assessments. Morning assessments were practical, brief, and conducted standing up. Sitting down was different. Sitting down meant she intended to stay a while. She was not entirely sure why she had done it. She told herself it was because she wanted to observe him for a few minutes in a resting state to assess his cognitive recovery. That was a perfectly legitimate clinical reason. She kept that thought in front of her and ignored the smaller, more honest one behind it. Your men tell me nothing, she said, which is their right. I have not asked them to, but I find I am curious about something that is not clinical. He waited. He was good at waiting. The song I hum, she said. You mentioned it on the first morning. I told you it was my mother's. You said you had heard it was for the dying. She paused. You knew what it was. He was quiet for a moment. My grandmother hummed it, he said finally, when I was very young. I did not know what it was called. I had not heard it in a long time. It was a short sentence. It was also, she suspected, more personal than he typically offered to people. She was a healer? Ilara asked. No, she was simply old. A beat. She said her mother had taught it to her. That it came from the hills. Mine said the same. Ilara looked at her hands for a moment. She learned it from her mother, and so on. It has been passed through healers in this region for longer than anyone can remember. The words are in a dialect that has mostly died out now. I know what some of them mean. Others I only know as sounds. What do the ones you know mean? She thought about it. The first part says something like the door is open. The middle part, if I am translating it well, says you are not required to hurry. The last part I think means we will still be here. She looked up at him. My mother said it was a promise, that it was telling the person at the threshold that there was no urgency in either direction. They could stay or go, and they would not be abandoned either way. Cale was looking at her with that particular quality of attention that she had begun to recognize, the one that felt different from simply listening. You sang that to me, he said, when I was unconscious. I hum it without thinking, she said. It is not a conscious choice. It is simply what happens when my hands are working and my mind is somewhere else. Even so, he said. She was not entirely sure what he meant by that. She was also not sure why those two words settled in her chest the way they did, small and warm and slightly inconvenient. She stood up, because sitting down had been a mistake that she was going to quietly correct. I am going to make you breakfast, she said. Then I would like you to try sitting up fully, with your feet on the floor, to see how your head responds to being upright. Only if it feels well. If you feel any dizziness or sharp pain, you will tell me immediately. Understood, he said. She went to the kitchen. She was halfway through cracking eggs into the pan when she became aware that she was humming. She stopped. She stood there for a moment in the quiet kitchen, with the pan warming in her hand, and the eggs ready, and the fire crackling, and she told herself very firmly that she was a professional, that she had a job to do, that the man in the other room was a patient and nothing more, and that she was going to continue to approach the situation with the same calm and practical competence she brought to everything. Then she went back to making breakfast, and she did not hum, and she was very successful at not thinking about two quiet words for almost 4 entire minutes. Outside, Owen was sitting on the low wall of her yard, with a cup of tea she had given him that morning, looking out at the village lane, which was beginning to show the first signs of life as the day properly started. A woman walked past with a basket. A boy ran after a chicken. Smoke rose from 6 chimneys. Owen sipped his tea. He had served Cale for 11 years, through 2 border wars and 1 succession crisis, and more difficult seasons than he cared to count. He had seen Cale be ruthless when ruthless was necessary, and steady when steadiness was required, and brilliant in the particular cold way that brilliant men were sometimes brilliant when the stakes were high enough to sharpen them. He had never seen Cale say very well to anyone about anything, without a reason. He finished his tea and did not say anything to anyone about what he was thinking, because he was 11 years into understanding when to keep his own counsel, and this was very clearly one of those times. The morning moved on. Cale sat up with his feet on the floor and did not feel dizzy, which meant the head injury was resolving better than expected. He told Ilara so. She wrote it in her logbook with her neat, unhurried handwriting. She asked him several short questions to test his memory and his reasoning, and he answered them all without difficulty. "Your recovery is going well," she said, which was an understatement of such proportion that he might have found it amusing if he were not at the same time aware that it was also a problem. A fast recovery was supposed to be a good thing. He sat on the cot, with his feet on the floor and the morning light coming through the narrow window, and he looked at the logbook on the table, and the herbs hanging from the ceiling, and the ceramic jar labeled simply Willow on the middle shelf, and he was aware, with the kind of clarity that tended to arrive inconveniently, that a fast recovery meant less time. He did not think about what less time meant. He was not ready to think about that yet. He asked Ilara, when she came back to check his balance while standing, whether the willow bark she kept was the bitter kind or the mild kind. She told him it was the bitter kind, that the mild kind barely did anything, and she had no patience for medicines that did not work. He said that seemed consistent with everything he had observed about her. She looked at him. Something in her expression was surprised, and then not surprised, and then carefully returned to its usual professional composure, but he had seen it move through those stages, and he filed it away. She went back to the kitchen. He sat down on the cot. He thought about the stitches. They were doing very well, too well, if he was being precise about it. If the rate continued, they would be strong enough to travel on by tomorrow. He thought about that. Then he thought about the fact that Owen would notice too, and would inevitably raise the subject of departure, and that he would have to have a response. He lay back on the pillow and stared at the ceiling of a healer's workroom in a small village he had never had reason to visit before, and he thought about what his response would be when that conversation came. It came the next morning. Owen knocked on the inner door, came in when Cale answered, and stood in the middle of the room with the expression of a man choosing his words. "You look well," Owen said. "I feel well," Cale agreed. "Well enough to travel." Cale did not answer immediately. Owen waited. He was very good at waiting too, but his waiting had a different texture from Cale's. Owen's waiting always contained the faint shadow of an opinion held politely in reserve. "The rib," Cale said finally. Owen looked at the ribs in question, which were, to be fair, still bruised. The bruising was dramatic, and would be for some time. Bruising was visible. "Yes," Owen said carefully. "The rib." "She said it needs more time." "Did she?" Owen said. "This morning." "I see," Owen said. A pause. "I will tell the men to stay comfortable," Owen said, and went out. He did not mention that he had been present in the doorway during the morning assessment, or that he had heard the healer say, in a tone of mild professional interest, that the rib bruising was resolving better than expected given the severity of the initial impact. He did not mention it because he was 11 years into understanding when to keep his counsel. He went and told the men they were staying. Inside, Cale lay back and thought about the fact that he had just said something that was not entirely true to the man who had served him faithfully for over a decade. He was surprised by how little guilt he felt. He was more surprised by how clearly, in the quiet of the room, he could hear through the wall the soft, wandering melody of a song that was meant for people standing at a threshold, deciding which way to go. He lay still. He listened. He did not, for the first time in a very long time, think about what needed doing next. Owen arrived on the 6th day. Not from outside, Owen was already there, but the Owen who arrived on the 6th day was a different version of the one who had been patiently posting watch shifts and fetching water and keeping the men occupied with camp tasks that did not strictly need doing. This Owen arrived at the inner door, with his shoulders set at an angle that Cale recognized as the specific angle of a man who had received new information and was now required to act on it. He knocked. "Come in," Cale said. Owen came in. He looked at Cale, who was sitting up in the chair by the window, which was where Cale spent most of his time now, since Ilara had cleared him for sitting. Owen looked at the chair, at the window, at the view of the yard, and the lane beyond it. Then he looked back at Cale. "I have had a message from the capital," Owen said. Cale waited. "The council is convening in 11 days. The border negotiations require your presence. Lord Harwick has sent a second rider." Owen paused. "The first rider I intercepted and turned back with a letter assuring them you were receiving care and would return shortly. The second rider has not brought a letter. He has brought a deadline." Cale absorbed this. "Harwick. He is not wrong that your presence is necessary. The negotiations cannot proceed without your authority." "Then, how is the road north?" Cale asked. Owen blinked at the apparent change of direction, then recovered. "Passable. Soft in the lower sections after the rain earlier this week. Harder further north. We could make the capital in 2.5 days, at a measured pace. 3, if we are cautious with my ribs," Cale said. "Yes," Owen said, "with your ribs." Cale looked out the window. The lane beyond the yard was quiet. A cat sat on a low stone wall in the sun. Somewhere out of sight, he could hear what might have been Ilara speaking to a village woman who had come to the door with a child who had a cough. "I will speak with her this evening," Cale said. Owen said nothing. "About the timeline for departure," Cale added. "Of course," Owen said. He went out. Cale remained at the window and did not think too carefully about what he felt when he considered leaving. He was skilled at not thinking too carefully about things that were inconvenient to examine. He had developed this skill over a long time, and he was very good at it. He was less good at it than usual today. It was the 7th evening when Ilara came in after dinner to do the last check of the day, and found him sitting in the chair with a quieter expression than usual. She had learned to read his expressions over the past week, not completely. He was too controlled for that, but in the way that a person learns the geography of a room they spend time in. She knew which silences meant he was thinking, and which meant he was simply resting. She knew that when his jaw set in a particular way, he was weighing something difficult. She knew that when something surprised him, his left hand moved slightly, before he controlled the impulse. She knew these things, the way she knew the habits of the cottage, without having tried to know them. She set down her things and began the evening examination. "Owen tells me you are preparing to leave," she said. She kept her voice in its usual professional register. "There are things that require my attention," he said. "I assumed there would be." She checked the stitching, which was holding well, better than well. "The wounds are in good shape. I would prefer another few days on the stitching, but I recognize you do not always have the option of doing what I prefer." "No," he said. "The ribs are more of a concern. Any impact to your right side in the next several weeks will be painful. You will need to be careful." "I am generally careful." "Careful of a different kind than usual, I mean. Not strategic careful. Physical careful." She sat back and looked at him directly. "You should not be riding hard for at least another 10 days. I can manage a measured pace." "Yes," Owen said the same thing. She met his eyes. "I will make you a kit for the journey. Herb packets for fever if it comes on. A salve for the stitching. Willow preparation for the pain. I will write down the instructions. I assume whoever continues your care will be able to follow written instructions?" "Yes." "Good." She folded her hands in her lap. A pause. Not the professional pause, but a slightly different one. "You have been an uncomplicated patient," she said. "That is not always the case with men who are accustomed to being in charge of things. They often try to manage their recovery the way they manage everything else." "You mean they give the illness instructions?" he said. "Something like that." The faintest lift at the corner of her mouth. "You did not do that." "I learned very early," he said, "that giving instructions to things that are not listening is a waste of time. That is a practical philosophy. I have tried to be practical." The quiet settled around them, the comfortable kind that had developed over the past several days, without either of them planning it. She was aware of it. She thought he was too. "May I ask you something?" he said. She looked at him. He very rarely asked permission for things. He was not the kind of man who needed to. She found that he had asked rather than simply proceeding to be interesting. "Yes," she said. "The song. The crossing song." He looked at her steadily. You said it tells the person at the threshold that there is no urgency, that they can stay or go and they will not be abandoned. That is what it means, as best I understand it. Do you believe that? He asked. Not as a technique. Not as a healer's tool. Do you believe it is actually true? She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. I believe, she said slowly, that most people who are frightened of exactly that, of being left behind, of the urgency of a choice. I believe the song addresses the real fear rather than the surface one. She paused. Whether it is literally true that a person can stand at a threshold indefinitely without consequences, no, that is not how thresholds work. But I think the comfort the song offers is still honest, because the fear it addresses is real. He was quiet for a long moment. I think, he said, that I have been standing at a threshold for a long time. She did not ask what kind. She did not ask because she thought she understood, and because she was not certain asking would be kind. That is not unusual, she said instead, for people who carry a great deal. He looked at her with that particular attention, the one that had stopped feeling like observation, and had started feeling like something else, something she did not have a clinical name for. No, he said. I suppose it is not. She stood up and gathered her things. I will prepare the travel kit tonight. Owen can collect it in the morning. Elara. She stopped. She did not look back immediately. She took a half-second, because she needed it. Then she turned. He was still sitting in the chair, and in the low light of the lamp his face was unguarded in a way that she suspected it very rarely was. Thank you, he said. Not for the stitches, for the rest of it. She stood in the doorway and absorbed that. You are welcome, she said. She went to the kitchen and began preparing the travel kit with steady hands, measuring out the herbs precisely, folding the written instructions into careful squares, and she hummed the crossing song all the way through, start to finish, which she had never done before in the kitchen, only ever in the workroom. She told herself it was habit. It was not entirely habit. In the back room, Cale sat in the chair by the window and looked at the dark lane outside and thought about thresholds and about a woman who spoke to him without fear and tended wounds without flinching and believed that the comfort in a song was honest because the fear it addressed was real. He thought about 11 days before the council. He thought about 11 days. He thought about the rib, which was still, technically, bruised. He had not lied to Owen. He had simply allowed Owen to reach his own conclusion, which had been that the rib was a limiting factor. The rib was a factor. It was a real thing. It was simply not quite the limiting factor it had been presented as. He sat with that for a while. Then he got up, which cost him a reasonable amount given the rib, and went to find Owen. We will leave in 3 days, he said. Owen did not point out that 3 days ago he had said 2 days, and 2 days ago he had said tomorrow. 3 days, Owen said. Yes, my lord. Cale went back inside. He sat down by the window again. 3 days. He told himself that was the practical choice. The road was soft. 3 days gave the stitching more time. 3 days was simply the responsible decision from a man who needed to arrive at the capital in a functional condition. He told himself this with some conviction. He was considerably less certain than he sounded, even to himself. She pressed 2 fingers to the sealed scar on the 7th morning, and everything changed. It was not a dramatic change. There was no sound, no sudden confrontation, no raised voices. It happened in the ordinary way that significant things sometimes happen, quietly, in the middle of a routine task, when the routine task suddenly reveals more than the routine called for. She was doing the morning assessment. She had done it every morning for 7 mornings in the same order, checking the head, then the collarbone, then the rib, then the side wounds, then asking him to tell her how the pain compared to the day before, on a scale she had established on day 1. It was efficient and methodical, and she was good at it. She pressed 2 fingers to the main scar on his left side, just below the rib, and the scar was smooth, not nearly healed, not progressing well. Smooth, fully sealed. The kind of smooth that happened weeks after the initial closing, not 7 days. She pressed along the length of it, the same. She pressed into the tissue around it, feeling for any of the internal tenderness that should still be present this early. There was very little, less than she would expect to find in 10 days, let alone 7. She straightened up and looked at him. He was looking back at her. Neither of them spoke. She moved to the rib and pressed along it carefully, feeling for the specific response that bruised ribs gave, the sharp protective tension of tissue that was still in the process of healing. There was some, less than yesterday, considerably less than there should have been. She stood up fully and looked at him and said nothing for a very long moment. He held her gaze without flinching, without explanation, without apology. He simply looked back at her with the steady patience of a man who had been waiting for this moment and had decided, somewhere along the way, to let it arrive on its own terms. She picked up her cloth and dipped it in the basin, and wrung it out, and began, with her usual care, to clean the areas around the scars. "Your men told me you heal fast," she said. Her voice was exactly as it always was, even, quiet, professional. "Yes," he said. "I adjusted for that," she said. "I did not adjust enough." "No," he agreed. "How long?" she asked. "How long before you could have traveled safely?" A beat that was not quite as long as it might have been. 3 days, he said. Perhaps 4, to be careful. She wrung the cloth out again and folded it neatly and set it aside, and she stood with her hands still for a moment, looking at the jar of willow bark on the middle shelf. Then she picked up the fresh linen and began rebinding the stitching with exactly the care she always brought to it. "You are angry," he said. "No," she said. "You are something." She tied the bandage and stepped back. "I am thinking," she said. He waited. She pulled the chair to the side of the cot and sat down, not quickly, not with any of the energy of someone acting on an impulse. She sat down the way she always did, with the deliberate and considered manner of a woman who had decided to stay a while. She folded her hands in her lap. "I want to understand something," she said. "Not to accuse you of anything. I simply want to understand." She looked at him steadily. "You could have left 4 days ago, possibly 5. You told Owen you needed more time. You gave reasons that were partially true, and not entirely true. You stayed." She paused. "Why?" He was quiet. She waited with the same patience she used when she was waiting for a patient to find the words for where something hurt, which was the kind of patience that did not press, and did not fill silences unnecessarily, but simply stayed present. "I have," he said at last, "a great number of rooms in my life." She waited. "Every room has a purpose," he said. "Every room has people in it who need something from me, or want something from me, or are managing their own positions in relation to mine. I understand those rooms. I know what they require." He looked at his hands for a moment, then back at her. "This room does not require those things." She absorbed that. "This room is a healer's workroom," she said. "Yes," he said. "And the person in it speaks to me, as if I am simply a person who was hurt and needed help." A pause. "You are," she said. "I know," he said. "That is the thing I had not realized I was missing." She sat with that for a moment. It was an honest thing to say. It was the kind of honesty that cost something, that came from somewhere specific and real, and she treated it the way she treated all honest things that cost something, with care and without rushing. "I am not angry," she said again. "I want to be clear about that. You are something," he said again, gently. She looked at her own hands. "I think I am a little sad," she said, which is a surprising thing to say about someone who was never really staying. The quiet settled around them, and it was not uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that happened between two people when a true thing had been said, and needed a moment to be what it was. "You knew," he said. "You have known for a few days." She looked up. "I suspected. The rate of healing was telling me something that I was choosing not to follow too closely." "Why?" She thought about whether to answer honestly, and then decided that honesty had been what this room ran on from the first night, and she was not going to change that now. "Because I was also not ready to think about what it meant," she said. He looked at her and she looked back, and in that particular moment, they were, very straightforwardly, two people who had found something unexpected in each other's company, and were standing at the edge of what that meant. She was the one who stood up first. She stood up because she was the healer, and this was her workroom, and she had been the one managing the terms of things since the first night. And managing the terms now meant choosing to stand up and pick up her logbook and write down what she had found and do the job she was here to do. Your wounds are healed, she said. The rib will be tender for another week or two, but it will not limit you seriously. You can travel today, if you choose. She said it without inflection, and she meant it without inflection. The choice was his. It had always been his. She had never been the thing keeping him here. He had kept himself here, for reasons that she now understood, and she respected those reasons, and she was not going to make the next thing harder by making it into something complicated. I will speak with Owen, he said. Good, she said. She wrote in the logbook. Her handwriting was, as always, neat and unhurried. Wounds fully healed. Patient cleared for travel. She dated it carefully and closed the book. Ilara, he said. She looked at him. I did not intend to deceive you specifically, he said. That is not a defense. I am simply saying that if I had been asked directly, I would have told you the truth. She considered this. I know, she said. I did not ask directly. No, he said. Because, she said, with the same honesty she had been using since he asked her about leaving, I was not certain I wanted to know the answer. He held her gaze. And in his face, controlled as it was, something shifted that she had not seen before. Something that was less contained than his usual expression. Something that was closer to plain feeling than managed presentation. That, he said quietly, is the most useful thing anyone has said to me in a very long time. She stood in her workroom with her logbook in her hands and looked at him, and she thought about the crossing song, which said the door is open, and you are not required to hurry, and we will still be here. She thought about thresholds. She thought about how long a person could stand at one. She set the logbook down on the table. Go speak with Owen, she said. I will make the travel kit. She went to the kitchen. He watched her go. Then he got up, slowly because the rib still complained, and went to find Owen, and the day moved forward the way days did, carrying things in a direction that could not be taken back, which was, she thought, probably the nature of all days worth living through. Owen did not look surprised. This was the thing that Cale noticed when he came out to the yard and said that they would begin preparations for departure. Owen listened, nodded once, and immediately began issuing quiet instructions to the men, with the practiced calm of a person who had already made contingency plans for this exact moment, which almost certainly meant that he had been making contingency plans for this exact moment every single day for the past week, and had simply been waiting. Tomorrow morning, Cale said, early. The horses will be ready, Owen said. We will take the north road. Yes. And I want to stop at the market before we leave. Cale said this with a specific neutrality that invited no comment. Owen gave no comment. I will arrange it, he said. Cale went back inside. The cottage had a different feeling to it now. Not worse, but different. The way air changes before weather. A kind of density in the ordinary. He stood in the kitchen doorway and watched Ilara measure dried herbs into squares of thin cloth, with the focused attention she brought to everything, her hands precise, her movements economical, and he thought about what she had said. She had not been certain she wanted to know the answer. He turned that over. He had served in difficult negotiations. He had faced opponents across treaty tables. He had sat in rooms where everyone present was simultaneously saying something and meaning something else, and he had learned very early to find the space between what was said and what was meant, because that space was where most of the real information lived. She had told him the truth about that space. She had not done it to shift his thinking or to make him feel a particular way. She had done it because honesty was apparently simply how she operated, the same way her hands moved with care, and her voice stayed even, and she hummed without thinking, when her attention was fully occupied. He sat down at the kitchen table, which was where he sat because it was where he sat, a pattern that had established itself without discussion, and that he had not questioned.
You do not have to help,
she said without looking up. I only have 2 hands, but I have done this many times. I know, he said. I am not going to help. I am going to sit here. She did look up then, briefly, with the small expression that he had catalogued over the past days as the one she had when she was surprised by something, and trying not to show it, but showed it slightly anyway. All right, she said, and went back to the herbs. He sat at the table and watched her work, and did not offer to help, and she did not ask him to, and the kitchen was warm from the fire, and the light was the particular amber of a late-day sun coming through old glass, and he thought about the capital, which was several days away and full of rooms with purposes. "The offer stands," he said. "About the library." She tied a packet closed. "I know. It is not conditional." She set the packet down and picked up the next. "I know that too. I only wanted to say it clearly," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "You are very accustomed," she said, "to making sure things are understood. Are you worried I will misunderstand this?" "I am worried," he said, which was not something he said often, "that I will give you a reason to think it was something other than what it is." "And what is it?" He looked at her steadily across the table. "An invitation," he said, "without conditions or expectations, to a place that has something you want, from a person who would like very much to give you access to it." She held the herb packet in both hands and looked at him. "That is clear," she said. "Good," he said. She set the packet with the others and began measuring the next. "I have not been to the capital," she said. "I have not been, actually, more than 2 days' ride from this village in my entire life." "That could change," he said. "It could," she agreed. The fire crackled. Outside, the voices of Owen's men moving about the yard, the sound of harness being checked and bags being reorganized, the ordinary sounds of departure being prepared. "There is a question," she said, still working, "that I have not asked." "Ask it," he said. "Who are you?" she said. "Not your name. I know your name. I mean, who are you, that 4 men ride through the night rather than leave you in a field, and a lord sends 2 riders with a deadline, and a border negotiation cannot proceed without your authority?" He was quiet. She set down the packet and looked at him properly. "You do not have to tell me," she said. "I have managed 11 days without knowing. I am simply aware that if I do not ask now, I will ask myself afterward why I did not." He held her gaze. "I am the Alpha King," he said, "of the Northern Territories and their dependencies. My full name is Cale Ashford. The negotiation Owen mentioned concerns the eastern border with the Harwick Territories, which has been in dispute for 3 years." He paused. "That is the short version." She was quiet. He waited, because he had learned over 11 days that she processed things at her own pace, and the processing was worth waiting for. "Alpha King," she said. "Yes." "And the healing," she said, "the rate of it." "Yes," he said again. She looked at him with an expression that moved through several things in quick succession, and she settled on the one that he had least expected, which was a kind of settled, quiet recognition. "That is why your grandmother knew the crossing song," she said. "The hill country, the old blood." "Yes," he said for the 3rd time. She nodded slowly, as if a piece had found its place. "And you chose," she said, "a village healer's cottage, to spend your recovery in, rather than any number of places with more resources, and more appropriate facilities. The choice was made for me initially," he said. "The men were trained to find the nearest competent healer, not to assess the suitability of the location. And after that first night," she said. He held her gaze. "The choice was mine," he said. She looked at him for a long time. Then she turned back to the herb packets. "I am going to finish these," she said, "and then I am going to write out the instructions, and then I am going to sleep, because tomorrow, I expect you will be gone before I am awake." "We ride early," he confirmed. "Then good night," she said. "Tonight, since I will not see you in the morning." "Elara," he said. She looked at him. "The next time I am wounded," he said, carefully, with the precision of a man who was choosing his words one at a time, "I would prefer to be brought here." She looked at him for a moment. "Try," she said, with equal precision, "not to be wounded." The corner of his mouth moved. "I will make every effort," he said. He got up from the table, slowly, because the rib was still making its opinion known, and he went through to the back room, and she listened to his footsteps on the floor, and the sound of the cot settling, and she finished the herb packets and wrote the instructions in her neat handwriting, and folded them carefully into the kit. She went to bed. She did not sleep for some time. She lay in the dark and thought about libraries, and the hill country, and the way the amber light had sat in a kitchen on an ordinary evening that had somehow not been ordinary at all, and she thought about a man who had stayed in a small room for reasons that had nothing to do with stitches, and had told her the truth about it when she asked. She thought about the crossing song. She thought about thresholds. She did not hum. The night passed around her, and at some point before dawn, she slept. She was right about the early start. When she came into the kitchen at first light, the yard was already active, the sound of horses being readied and equipment being loaded, the clipped efficient voices of men with a clear task and a timeline. She put water on to heat automatically, because it was what she did every morning, and she stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the pale gray yard. Cale was there. He was speaking to Owen with the contained, directed attention she had seen him use on the few occasions she had witnessed him managing something practical, pointing once toward the north road, receiving a response, nodding once. He was wearing his own coat, the dark one that had been cleaned and repaired, and from the kitchen window he looked entirely unlike the man who had arrived across a horse 11 nights ago, and considerably more like whatever he actually was in the world outside her cottage. She watched for a moment, then turned back to the kettle. She set out 2 cups without deciding to. She had the tea made when she heard his boots on the step and the door, and then he was in the kitchen, and she handed him the cup without making a ceremony of it, the way she had handed him water on the first night. "The kit is on the table," she said. "The instructions are inside. The salve goes directly on the scar tissue. The willow preparation is for pain, 2 measures in hot water, not more than 3 times a day. I will tell the physician at the capital," he said. "Tell them the bitter kind works better," she said. "I find that people who have not discovered this need to be told." Something at the corner of his mouth. "I will tell them." He drank the tea. She drank hers. Outside, the men finished their preparations, and the yard grew quieter, the kind of quiet that meant they were ready and waiting. "The village will be fine," she said, though he had not asked. "The news that a king recovered here will probably get out eventually. I will manage it." "I am going to leave something for the village," he said. "Before we go. Owen will handle it." She looked at him. "You do not need to." "I know," he said. She was quiet. "Thank you," he said, "for the 11 days. Thank you," she said, "for being an uncomplicated patient, mostly." He looked at her. She looked at him. There was a great deal in the room that neither of them said, which was the right choice, because some things are better kept at the threshold, and some things need to stay there, not because they are not real, but because they are real in a specific way that requires more time than either person currently has, and pressing them into words before they are ready does not make them more real, only more complicated. She walked with him to the door. He stepped outside. He said her name once, not as a farewell exactly, but in the way of someone recording something. She said his name back. He went to his horse. She stood in her doorway and watched them go, Owen and the 4 men and the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, who had lain on her workroom table for 11 nights and eaten breakfast at her kitchen table, and sat by her window on market day, and told her the truth when she asked, and stayed. She now understood fully, for reasons that had been real, whether she named them or not. She watched until they turned at the lane's far end. She went back inside. She did not look at the back room. She went to the kitchen, washed the 2 cups, set them on the shelf. She opened her logbook. She wrote the date. She wrote, "Patient departed in good condition, full clearance granted." She closed the logbook. She stood in the kitchen. Then she crossed to the back room door and opened it, because she had to at some point, and doing it quickly was more practical than waiting. The cot was made up with the kind of precision that suggested military training. The chair was pushed back to its usual place by the wall. Everything was tidy in the way of someone who had taken care to leave nothing behind that could be considered a burden. Except that on the small table beside the cot, there was a strip of leather. She crossed the room and picked it up. On it, in a handwriting she did not know, was a single word. Her name. Written in a script she recognized as old, the Hill dialect, the same words as the crossing song. She did not know all the letters. She knew enough to read it. Beneath the name, in the same handwriting, 3 words. She translated them slowly, working through letters that were halfway between the old form and the new. "We will still be here." She stood in the back room of her cottage with the strip of leather in both hands, and the morning light coming in through the window, and the village beginning its day outside. She did not cry. She was not a person who cried easily. She folded the leather strip carefully, and put it in her apron pocket, and went out to start her day. She had 3 patients to check on, a supply of chamomile that needed restocking, and a letter to Owen's address that she was going to write that evening, asking, as a practical matter relating to her professional development, whether the offer of library access was one that had a reasonable timeline attached to it. It was a practical question. She was a practical person. She went out to start her day. The capital was exactly as Cale had left it. He had known it would be. It had only been 11 days, and capitals did not change in 11 days. The council chambers had the same high ceilings, and the same smell of old wood and tallow candles, and the particular slightly cold air of a room where important things happened, but warmth was considered a distraction. Lord Harwick had the same 3 horizontal lines between his brows that appeared whenever he was managing something he considered beneath his dignity, while pretending he considered it essential. The advisors all stood in exactly the positions they stood in at the start of every meeting, arranged without acknowledging that they were arranged. Cale took his seat at the head of the table, and the meeting began. He was effective. He was always effective in these rooms. It was not a quality that he had to reach for. It came from the same place that the stillness came from, and the patience, and the ability to read 3 things being said simultaneously, and find the one that mattered. He moved the border negotiation forward by 3 significant points in a single afternoon, which Harwick had clearly not expected, based on the recalibration visible in his expression by the second hour. Owen sat at Cale's right shoulder and kept the record. At the end of the session, when the others had filed out, and it was just the 2 of them, with the maps and the notes, Owen began organizing the papers in the meticulous way he had. Cale sat at the table. "You are humming," Owen said. Cale stopped. He had not been aware of it. "It is a habit I seem to have acquired," he said. Owen stacked the papers. He said. "Is there something you want to say?" Cale asked. "No," Owen said. "There is something you want to say." "There is something I am choosing not to say," Owen said, with the precision of a man who found the distinction important. "Which is different." Cale looked at him. Owen looked at the papers. "She will write," Cale said. "I thought she might," Owen said. "When she does, make sure I see the letter immediately. Not when it is convenient, immediately." "Of course," Owen said. He continued organizing the papers. Cale remained at the table and thought about a kitchen window and amber light and a woman who had told him she was a little sad, which had been the most honest thing anyone had said to him in a time he could not clearly calculate. He thought about this with considerably more attention than he was giving the border negotiation, which was saying something. The days moved. He was efficient, and he was present, and he moved things forward in the ways that needed moving. And the council was satisfied, and Harwick was appropriately managed, and the eastern border question resolved itself into a framework by the end of the second week. He attended a formal dinner and was diplomatic. He reviewed the winter supply reports and made 2 decisions that the agriculture minister had been waiting 3 months for. He was, by all external measures, exactly what he was supposed to be. He was also, by Owen's private accounting, humming in corridors at an increasing rate. Owen kept this information to himself. On the 18th day after his return, Owen brought a letter to the council chamber at the end of the morning session, not at the end of the day, not when it was convenient, immediately, as instructed, and set it beside Cale's hand without a word. Cale looked at the handwriting on the outside. Neat. Unhurried. He picked it up. He read it at the table while Owen waited, not reading over his shoulder, simply present in the way he was always present, organized around the edges of whatever Cale needed. When Cale set the letter down, his expression was the one that Owen had not seen before the cottage in Aldenmere, the one that came from somewhere specific and settled and had not been arranged for any particular effect. "She is inquiring," Cale said, "about library access." "Is she?" Owen said. "Specifically about which collections are accessible to visiting scholars, and what the process would be for arranging a visit." "Practical," Owen said. "She is a practical person," Cale said. "I had that impression," Owen said carefully. Cale picked up his pen. He wrote a reply. It was not a short reply. It was the reply of a man who had a number of things to communicate in addition to the answer to the practical question, and who had been thinking about how to communicate them for 18 days, with the careful attention he brought to things that mattered. He was not, in the common understanding of the word, a sentimental person. He did not deal in decorative language or dramatic expression. He dealt in clarity and precision and honest statement, and he applied those same tools here, which produced a letter that was clear and precise and honest, and said, among the practical arrangements, that the library access was available at any time she chose, and that if she came to the capital, she would find that certain rooms in it had been made considerably more welcoming than she might expect of such a place. He did not say by whom. He thought she would know. He sealed the letter and handed it to Owen. "Today," he said. "Today," Owen confirmed, and went to arrange the courier. Cale sat at the council table for a moment after Owen left, in the large room with the high ceilings and the old wood smell, and he thought about a small workroom with herbs on the ceiling, and a logbook on the table, and a jar of the bitter kind of willow bark on the middle shelf. He thought about what it had felt like to be in a room that did not require anything of him except to heal. He thought about going back. Not because he was wounded. He was not wounded. He was, by any reasonable measure, in the best condition he had been in for some time. He thought about going back because there was a village in the lowlands that had a healer who had told him the truth when he asked, and had not asked him for anything, and had hummed in her kitchen without thinking about it, and who had stood in her doorway and said his name once, in the particular way of someone recording something. He thought about the crossing song. "The door is open. You are not required to hurry. We will still be here." He picked up his pen and pulled a fresh sheet of paper toward him. He wrote a second letter, not to Ilara, to the village council of Aldenmere, which he knew from Owen's maps was administered by a council of 7. The letter was formal and brief, and contained several specific proposals regarding the village's taxation status and road maintenance allocation, proposals that were entirely within his authority, and that would, practically speaking, make life in Aldenmere somewhat easier in measurable ways. He signed it with his full name and title. He did not mention the healer. He did not need to. He sealed this letter too, and set it beside Owen's organizational system, which Owen would find and action without being asked, because Owen understood how things worked between them after 11 years. Then he went to the next meeting. He hummed in the corridor on the way. He did not stop when he noticed. Owen, coming from the opposite direction with a stack of correspondence, passed him in the hall and said nothing, because nothing was the right thing to say, and Owen knew it. Cale went into the meeting. He was effective. He was also, for the first time in a long time, thinking about somewhere else while being effective, which was unusual, and which he found he did not particularly want to stop. The letter from the capital arrived on a clear morning, 3 weeks after Cale had ridden away, and Ilara read it standing at her kitchen table, with her morning tea going cold beside her. It was not a short letter. She had expected a short letter, a practical reply to a practical inquiry, the name of the relevant archivist, the process for a visiting scholar's credential, perhaps a brief acknowledgement. What she received instead was several pages in the same handwriting she had seen on the leather strip, clear and measured and precise, that answered all her practical questions, and then said several other things, in exactly the way of a person who was accustomed to having a great deal to communicate, and had decided not to withhold it. She read it twice. Then she set it down and picked up her tea, which was cold, and drank it cold anyway. She thought about what Owen had said when she had asked him, on the third day, whether there was anything she needed to know about her patient medically. He had said, "You only need to know that he heals fast." She had thought at the time that this was the most information she was going to get, and had accepted it. She understood now, in retrospect, that Owen was very good at answering the question asked, and nothing more, which was a skill she recognized, because she used it herself sometimes. She thought about the 11 days. She thought about them with the clarity that she had not let herself use while they were happening, the way you sometimes cannot see the full shape of something while you are standing inside it, and need to step back before the outline becomes visible. She picked up the letter again. She read the part near the end 3 times. It said, in the careful, precise language of a man who meant every word and had chosen each one deliberately, that the city was large and the palace was formal, and most of the rooms in it required things, but that there were, as she might now know, exceptions to that, and that she would find at least one room there that had been made an exception specifically. She set the letter down. She went to see her patients. She had 4 that morning, 2 check-ins on recovering cases, and 2 new arrivals, one with a persistent headache, and one with a child who had eaten something she should not have. She managed all 4 with her usual competence, and returned to the cottage by midday. She made lunch. She sat at the kitchen table and ate it. The kitchen had not changed. The table had not changed. The window was the same window. The chair across from her was the same chair. And yet the kitchen felt different now in the specific way that spaces feel different after something has happened in them that cannot be taken back. Not different worse, just different now, marked by the thing that had been there and was no longer there. She got up and found her writing paper. She sat down and wrote a reply. She was a practical person, and she wrote practically. She thanked him for the information about the archives. She confirmed that the proposed visiting arrangements were workable, given her schedule. She mentioned that she would need to find coverage for the village during any absence, which was not simple but was possible. She had a young woman with good instincts who had been informally apprenticing under her and could manage routine cases. She said she expected to be able to arrange a visit within 2 months, possibly sooner. She did not say anything about the part near the end, the part she had read 3 times. She did not say anything about it because she did not yet have words for what she wanted to say about it that were also honest, and also the right amount. And she had learned from 11 days of close observation that this was also his approach to things he was not yet ready to say, and she thought he would understand the absence. She sealed the letter and went to arrange for it to go with the next courier passing north. On her way back from the courier, she passed the market lane, which was quiet on a non-market day, and she thought about the morning he had sat at her kitchen window and watched the lane with the careful attention of a man observing something he found genuinely interesting, and she thought about the cat on the wall in the sun. She wondered if he had liked the village. She thought he had. She thought it would not be the strangest thing in the world to go to the capital and see its library, which she genuinely wanted to do, and which was a practical and professional aspiration, entirely separate from any other consideration. She thought about the letter near the end. She went home. She found, that evening, a second official document that had arrived with the courier, addressed to the village council, which her neighbor on the council had brought to her door, because he had a theory and could not help himself. She read it, which took some time because official documents were dense, and found that it concerned the village's taxation arrangement and road maintenance, both of which would be significantly improved under the terms outlined. Her neighbor watched her read it. "Do you know anything about this?" he asked. "No," she said, which was technically true. He looked at her for a long moment. "The king's mark is on it," he said. "Yes," she said. "The man who was here recovering," he said, not a question. She handed the document back to him. "Take it to the council," she said. "It is good news for the village. That is the part that matters." He went away, not entirely satisfied, but taking the practical point. She closed her door. She stood in her kitchen and thought about a man who had understood, without being told, that the thing she cared about most about Aldenmere was the people in it, and whether they were all right. She thought about that for a long time. Then she sat down and added a short note to her letter, which was only a few words long. She said, "The village council has received your document and will be very pleased, and so is the healer, and thank you for understanding what to do." She sealed the letter again. She sent it the next morning. 2 weeks later, a reply arrived. Then she wrote again. Then he wrote. The letters did not become shorter, which was something she noticed, something that told her something. When correspondence is simply practical information being exchanged, it shortens as the practical information is covered. When it does not shorten, it is because there is more than practical information being exchanged. She noticed this. She also noticed that she was sleeping better than she had in years, which she did not immediately connect to anything specific, and then, when she did connect it, was not sure what to make of the connection, and so set it aside and kept writing letters. Owen, at the capital end of things, noticed the letters arriving and said nothing. He also noticed that Cale was less prone to the specific kind of silence he sometimes fell into in difficult seasons, the kind that came from carrying too much alone, and that the corridor humming had continued and showed no signs of stopping, and that Cale had twice referenced the library archives in council contexts in ways that had nothing to do with the negotiation at hand, but everything to do with what a healer from a lowland village might find interesting there. Owen said nothing about any of this. He kept his records. He answered his own correspondence. He arranged, quietly and without drawing attention to it, for a particular set of rooms in the East Wing to be made comfortable. The East Wing had the best light in the morning and was close to the archives and had a kitchen that was smaller and warmer than the formal palace kitchens and felt, in Owen's assessment, more like a place where a person might drink cold tea standing at a table and think about things. He did not mention to Cale that he had done this. He expected Cale knew. She arrived on a Tuesday. Not because Tuesday was significant. Tuesdays were simply when the weekly courier went north, and when the weekly courier went north, it went through the capital, and the logical thing, when one was arranging a visit to the capital, was to travel with the courier's party for safety and convenience. Elara was a practical person. The young woman apprentice, whose name was Clara, and who had, as Elara had told Cale in a letter, genuinely good instincts, had been managing the village cases for 2 days already, and had reported back with efficient summaries that demonstrated she was going to be fine. Elara had reviewed the summaries and added 2 notes about the chronic knee case and the pregnant woman who was due in 6 weeks, and then she had packed a bag with the kind of practiced simplicity of a person who was accustomed to needing everything to fit in 2 hands. She had brought, in addition to her personal things, a smaller bag of herb supplies, because she was going to be near the Capitol archives, and there were 3 specific texts she had been thinking about for years, and she intended to take notes, and the notes were going to be detailed, and this was the purpose of the trip. This was the purpose of the trip. She told herself this in the cart with the courier's party on the first day, sitting in the back with her bag on her knees and watching the landscape change as they moved north, the lowland flatness giving way to hillier country, and then to the denser, older landscape that approached the capital. She had not seen any of this before. She looked at it with attention and filed it away. She was shown to the East Wing on her arrival by a quiet young man who introduced himself as one of Owen's staff and who seemed to know exactly who she was and exactly where she was going, which she found neither surprising nor uncomfortable. He showed her to a set of rooms that were lighter than she expected and warmer than she expected and had, she noticed with something that moved through her without needing a name, a kitchen. A small one, with a window and a table. She set her bags down. She changed out of traveling clothes. She went to the archives. She spent 4 hours in the archives on the first afternoon, and it was, without any qualification, one of the most satisfying 4 hours of her professional life. The collections were extensive in ways she had not fully imagined, and the archivist, a small, energetic woman named Frances who had been told to expect her, and was clearly delighted to have someone who had specific questions, was excellent company. She found 2 of the 3 texts she had been thinking about and began making notes immediately, the kind of dense, methodical notes that were illegible to anyone but herself and completely clear to her. She had tea in the archives with Frances, who told her 3 excellent things about the history of herbal practice in the Northern Territories that Elara had not known, and Elara told her 2 things about lowland plant varieties that Frances wrote down with the enthusiasm of a person receiving a gift. She returned to the East Wing rooms as the light was changing. She had known, arriving, that Cale knew she was coming. He had arranged the rooms. He had presumably arranged Frances's welcome. She had known this and had not been troubled by it. It was the kind of practical preparation that she would have made herself in his position. She had not, she realized as she came into the kitchen to put water on to heat, thought carefully about what came next. She had been thinking about the archives. She thought about this honestly. She had been thinking, genuinely, primarily about the archives, and now she was thinking about everything else, which was a large category that had been present and patient, and was now simply more present. The knock came before the water had boiled. She said, "Come in the same tone she used in her cottage when she knew who was on the other side of the door, and was occupied with something practical. He came in. He was not wearing the formal coat. He had on simpler clothes, the kind she associated with the kitchen window on market day, and he was a few inches taller than she remembered, which might have been the rooms, or might have been that she had only ever seen him horizontal or sitting. "Frances sent word that you stayed 4 hours," he said. "I lost track of time," she said. "It is a very good collection." "I am glad," he said. She got down 2 cups. He sat at the kitchen table. She made tea and brought it to the table, and sat down across from him and set his cup at the same position she had set cups for 11 mornings in a kitchen in Aldenmere. And they looked at each other across the table in the clear late light, and neither of them said anything for a moment. "You are well," he said finally. "I am very well," she said. "You?" "Better than I have been in some time," he said. She looked at him. "The ribs," she said. "Fully healed," he said. The corner of his mouth moved. "Good," she said. "I was fairly confident they would be." She picked up her cup. "There is a formal dinner this evening," he said. "You are not required to attend." "I know," she said. "But if you wish to." "I will think about it," she said. He nodded. "Francis told me," he said, "that you asked specifically about the Northern Territory herb classifications. There is a text in the restricted collection that covers that." She did not mention it because she was not sure it was the right level for the inquiry, but I think it would be. Ilara looked at him. "The restricted collection. I can arrange access," he said. "You could arrange access to the capital's restricted archives," she said. "Yes," he said, with the specific evenness she recognized as the expression of a man who was being very careful not to take too much satisfaction in being able to offer something. "That is," she said, "genuinely very useful." "I thought it might be," he said. She set her cup down and looked at him, and he looked back, and across the kitchen table in a city she had never been to, in rooms she had never seen before, everything was, somehow, exactly as recognizable as the crossing song, slow and repetitive and clear, in a way that only things learned very early could be. "I am not staying long," she said. "Clara is managing, but I should be back within the week." "I know," he said. "And I will need to come back to the archives at some point, possibly more than once. The collection is larger than I expected." "The access is permanent," he said. "Any time." "Good," she said. The water had boiled for the tea, and the rooms were warm, and outside the capital was doing whatever capitals did in the evenings, and inside the kitchen there were 2 cups on a table, and the particular ease of a silence that had nothing to fill in. She had thought, on the road coming north, that she might feel out of place here. She had expected formality and grandeur and the specific discomfort of being somewhere she did not belong. She felt none of those things. She felt, sitting in this kitchen, in the east wing of a palace, in a city she had never visited, entirely like herself. She thought this was probably not a coincidence. "The dinner," she said. "Yes," he said. "I will attend," she said, "if the offer stands." "It stands," he said. "I do not have anything appropriate to wear." "I can arrange." "I was not asking you to arrange it," she said. "I was simply noting that I do not have anything appropriate, and that Francis seems like a person who might know where one would find appropriate clothing in a capital city, and that I intend to ask her." Something happened in his expression. "Yes," he said. "She would know." "Good," Ilara said. "Then that is handled." She picked up her tea. He picked up his. Outside, the city moved in its evening patterns, and inside, 2 people who had found each other in the least expected way sat at a kitchen table and did what they had been doing for some time now, which was simply being present in the same room, which had started as necessity and had become, somewhere along the way, something considerably more than that. She was not going to put a name to it tonight. She thought neither was he. There was time. That was what the crossing song said, and she believed it, and she thought he believed it too. "The door is open. You are not required to hurry. We will still be here." She drank her tea. Across the table, very quietly, he began to hum. She recognized the tune immediately. She looked up. He was looking at her over the rim of his cup, and she was looking back at him, and neither of them said anything. Then she picked up her cup and looked out the kitchen window at the capital evening, and after a moment she joined him, her voice soft and unhurried, the old words she only half understood but knew completely, the song that was not for dying at all. It was always for the living. It had always been for exactly this.